quickly with the agenda for today. It's just as I said, the introduction of the EERAdata. Then I will go into technical details of socio-economic quantification assessment in EERAdata. And then Nico Natek from Xena will introduce the supply side module, which is focusing on the supply side energy generation side of the project. And then we have some space for discussion and questions, of course. So what is EERAdata about? I will keep it short because I think the most of the audience know us already, and there are several videos about details. EERAdata, well, it actually was funded to operationalize the energy efficiency first principle on a municipal and regional level, not on a national level. We want to operationalize the energy efficiency first principle by assessing the multiple benefits that arise through energy efficiency. So we quantify these multiple benefits. It will also has an output as create a software solution, which with a related database, which helps municipalities and regions to perform these assessments. The outputs, in a nutshell, the scientific methodologies that are presented in the last webinar and in this webinar. Then we will have a parameter and indicator list for socio-economic and LCA assessment. I think this is valuable for other projects, for other models, and can be seen in our publications. Then we have, of course, the software solution, which is testable very soon. And then the comprehensive database, for which we created default and proxy values. I think it's at the moment around 600 parameters, which we are incorporating into the software solution. And then we will have at the end implementing guidelines on this socio-economic LCA environmental assessment. The EERAdata project consists of 9 partners from 6 countries. We selected the countries, or we brought our consortium up of several reasons. One reason was, of course, to have regional clusters in separate climate zones. So our practical partners are located in Spain, in the region of Andalusia. We have the city of Copenhagen and the city of Valencia in Slovenia. And then we have the scientific partners, the development partners, which are Cuama, also in Spain, Trilateral, focusing on data research in London and Dublin. Then we have the DTU, Danish Technical University in Copenhagen, focusing on the indoor climate. ITTI in Poland, focusing on the programming and development of the tool. And Xena in Slovenia, focusing on energy supply side and energy agency topics. What is the EERAdata decision support tool? We have 5 assessment methodologies, which is the energy demand, the LCA lifecycle assessment, socio-economic, indoor environment, and supply side assessment. For that, we provided algorithms and calculation methods. We provide default and proxy data, and at the end, and this is at the stage of the project where we are now, we provide also the case studies, typologies, and guidelines. We want to integrate the tool into the municipal work environment as good as it's possible. This is why we have our 3 practical partners. So we want to, and we analyze the existing data streams, data situation, existing processes, calculation methods, workflows, and we want to create something which is adaptable and flexible as possible to work in these different environments in different municipalities. What kind of data are we processing? We have different layers of data. What we call minimum requirements are real building data, which is necessary to run our calculations and assessments. This is, for example, building cubature, location, building age. This kind of determines the outcome of the calculation methods. Then we have so-called desired data, which is improving the results significantly. For example, when we know what heating system is installed, or which story height each story has, or how many windows the building has. And then we have detailed data for socio-economic assessment, which is mostly proxy data or scientific data. If we get something there, we will improve the results even more. But I think the main parameters are in the desired data frame. If we don't get the real data, so if for the minimum requirements, we can't perform calculations. If we don't get the real data for the desired data, we have the option to come back to our proxy database, which means we analyzed regional statistics, we analyzed national statistics, scientific reports, modeling outputs, and this is the data we're working with when we don't get the real data. And this applies also for the detailed assessment. This is the brief overview, and then I want just to give an overview over the different calculation methods, how we discussed this last time in our first technical webinar, just that you get an insight on the whole scope of the tool. So what actually are the parts of the software solution, the EERAdata DST? First is the data preparation, which is kind of consisting of Excel templates, which municipalities can fill in and can be loaded into the tool. Then we have an energy demand and consumption calculation module, which is modeling and not simulating, but assessing the energy consumption of the building based on cubature, based on materials and heating system. We have the life cycle assessment module, which is assessing the environmental impact, the embedded energy of the building, what materials are used, how many CO2 emissions are generated through the building construction, deconstruction, and operation. And then we have the indoor climate assessment, which is focusing on the indoor effects in schools, especially in schools, and especially assessing the productivity effects and well-being effects of pupils and teachers in schools. So we can assess how many sick days we have per year and how it improves through building renovation, or how the productivity of pupils increases through building renovation. And then we have the socio-economic assessment and supply side assessment. I don't want to tell too much about it because this is what we will actually dig into deeper right now. So that's it. Like I said, this is covered in the last webinar. You can see the different elements in on our website, on YouTube. You see the recordings of these parts. And then we have the two elements which are discussed in this webinar. Just to briefly recap, the energy demand module, as I already mentioned, some of it is based on the building cubature, building size, building technology, location. And the outputs are the energy demand, primary energy consumption, heating demand, cooling demand, and it assesses also the energy sources, CO2 emissions. And these outputs are feeding into the different other elements, like the life cycle assessment, supply side assessment, or indoor climate assessment. The same goes for the life cycle assessment. We have a lot of sources, data sources, like the building materials, building services, what kind of renovation measures have been implemented. Also, what energy demand is the basis of the building? What is the embedded energy? What are the energy sources? Is it district heating or is it not district heating? And this is kind of calculated. And as an output, we get the greenhouse gas emissions over the lifetime of the building and the environmental impact of building renovation, for example, the improvement. And these feeds especially into socio-economic assessment, where all the cost data is added to the outputs and into the reporting of the tool. Finally, we have the indoor climate assessment, which is based on a lot of weather data on the cubature of the building components, windows, heating systems, ventilation, cross ventilation, AC like systems, and also terrain and weather data. So here we simulate more or less the indoor climate in schools at the moment. The outputs I already mentioned are productivity effects, well-being effects. And this module can be gradually extended also with light effects, and we work on developing it for other building types like office buildings. Output is feeding a lot into the socio-economic assessment and to the reporting. Yeah, this was the recap, briefly and short, but I think you can really go into detail either by just asking us via email or asking later in the discussion. We have also the developers of the other modules in the panel today. So if there's remaining questions, you can ask them today. And you can see the videos online as well. Yeah. The second part now is the socio-economic module. So how do we assess socio-economic effects of building energy efficiency, which means how do we assess the impact that a building renovation or implementation of energy efficiency measures has on the building, and what impacts does it have on the society, on the occupants, and on the, for example, public budget. I will make a little excursion in the beginning. And I just want to talk about why and is socioeconomic assessment important and what potential does it actually bring to us. An interesting thing is we have the revision of the European Energy Efficiency Directive is coming very soon. The first proposal was published, I think, a month ago or 3 weeks ago. And in this revision of the EED, the energy efficiency first principle was finally set as an article. And in this article, it stated that the member states shall promote and where cost-benefit assessments are required, and I think they're always required in renovation measures, ensure the application of cost-benefit methodologies that allow proper assessment of wider benefits of energy efficiency solutions from the societal perspective. And I think this is something that EERAdata will definitely address, and it will offer a practical approach for municipalities and smaller entities to do this first assessment. So why is it at the first place a good thing to do this? First, it's become a legislative requirement at some point, especially for long-term renovation strategies. Second, it is a justification for energy efficiency investments, especially when we compare it to supply-side investments or investments into other technologies. I think having these social impacts listed and quantified can be a huge justification for maybe also to get one step further in the renovation process. Then it identifies economic and monetary benefits for various stakeholders. So we have a lot of players in the renovation process, the companies, the municipalities, the occupants, and it can tell what benefits it creates for each of these stakeholders. Then it's an argument, a motivation for more comprehensive energy efficiency measures. So go the extra mile, invest a little bit more, having a ventilation system installed instead of not into schools will improve the outputs and the payback also. Then it changes the role of the buildings. Buildings can be suddenly something, we can measure our health with, and we see it as something where we spend 90% of our time in. Increased well-being and health, I think this should be clear. And then the other societal issues which can be addressed by. It doesn't really affect the municipality itself, but it affects the society, like environmental pollution, climate change goals, alleviation of fuel poverty. Just here a few sources from the European Commission where they name some of the potentials of multiple benefits. For example, up to 2 school weeks are saved per year, or the annual performance increases between 2 and 8%, which is of course, or 12% increase of productivity, which is of course a huge amount of money when we consider 100 employees for a municipality in one building. And then of course the indoor climate benefits, for example, reduced medical costs, reduced asthmatic illnesses, and all these topics. What are the model topics in the current version of the EERAdata DST at the socio-economic module? We reduce the amount of topics to handle a quantifiable number. Problem is the data sources for the most of these socio-economic topics. So we have a few of them, and we will reduce it also to the amount that is valuable for municipalities as investors in this process. So we didn't want to go a lot into the societal topics like the political or energy goal topics. So here we just go into the different payback options for the municipality. So what is modeled? The energy cost estimation, particular meta emissions, like the PM10 emissions, CO2 cost assessment based on emission trading costs, national costs, and social CO2 costs, which is quite new, I think. Then the job creation, so how many jobs are actually created in the location where the building was built. The tax returns, how many taxes do you get actually back from this project? And then the reduction of fuel poverty. This applies only to households. These are the 6 elements that are implemented at the moment. And they are all monetized, and they are all tried to be very adaptive to the location at the place. Here, for example, we wanted to take the 13 jobs created per 1 million euro invested, which is the average number for Europe. But with this number, no one can actually work. If you have a municipality without any companies that do construction works, or you don't have even in the region no companies that do construction works, I think it's really hard for me to sell you the number of 13 jobs that will be created in your surroundings when you build a building. And this is something that we wanted to address in this module. How does it look like? It's a network module. So each event triggers another event. The source is the renovation measures, and they trigger impacts, and these impacts trigger other impacts. And this is why you see here how these topics that I just mentioned are working together. And then we get the three sources and the three benefit typologies: the public budget benefits, the socio-economic benefits, and environmental benefits as outputs of the module. We go into this a little bit details later. What is the specification of the modeling? So the modeling in this part is completely data-based, data-driven. It focuses on knowledge, on scientific results of other modules, of reports, of project evaluations, statistics, national, international findings. So it's not, we don't create own values, we don't measure, because I think for the broadness of the project, since we are adapting to each municipality and location in Europe, this was impossible. But we will take sources from each country and from research work and adapt it to the situation where we are, the location. A good thing about this kind of approach is, or the approach we chose, is that we have a very transparent manner. So each of the values can be seen, can be adjusted, can be changed. And it is reverse, it has a reverse progression. So it's not like a artificial intelligence network or a neural network where you feed data in and it learns. Here you can actually go reverse and see, okay, when I know how many jobs I created after 1 year, I can also see which reasons it had why I created these 13 jobs. It's statistic-based, and it's adapting existing scientific practical estimates and local challenges and situations. That's what I meant. And this, I think, is a huge advantage to other evaluations that were done before, which were always a bit broader and looking on the societal effects. Here we want to look on specific buildings, on specific locations, and specific stakeholders and decision makers. A little mathematical twist here. I don't want to go into much detail, so if you have questions about the mathematics behind the module, then please write me an email or just ask the question later. The basic behind all this is a Bayesian network. So it's a probability-based network, which means one probability of one event to occur triggers the probability of another event to occur. Which means if I have a probability that I create 13 jobs, for example, and the probability is 18%, this kind of progresses into the next step and say, okay, this means how much income increase do I have with another 70% probability. And this is how this network is created. So it's actually probability based and gives, in this way, a very transparent message, because you don't get just a value, you know in which range the results are. So here, the benefits that of this network, the big benefit, it can deal with uncertainty, in which we have a lot in municipalities. Uncertainty in building data, uncertainty in the effects of renovation measures. I think there's no data set which has no uncertainty almost. It can deal with data gaps. So if we don't have data available, we can fill the gaps with proxy data or a probability distribution, how it could most probably be. So for example, if we don't know the material of the windows of a building, we can say, okay, the most probable distribution in Velenje, in Slovenia, is following. And then we can apply this distribution into the model. It can update anytime when new information is available. So if evidence is known, the network can update. And it can add conditions. So you can have a local specification. I can add this to the network, and then I will also change the results. The graphical network is not integrated in the software solution at the moment, but it can be seen, and you will see it later in the methodological description. And then we have a modular structure, which means we can adapt and increase the module, we can shrink it, we can scale it in any kind of way. So, for example, I think there will be kind of a mode estimation added in the next iteration of this module. How does this look? For example, I have a few examples here, and then I show you the results of the module. Here, for example, we have the job creation. You see in the middle, there's the cost of investment and the investment sum, which of course determines the profit of companies in the region. And to determine the number of jobs that are created, I have the sources, so that we assessed around 50 sources and models in which the job creation induced by energy efficiency was investigated. And these results were statistically analyzed. So we have, for example, different conditions which led to a certain amount of jobs that have been created. For example, the unemployment rate in the location or the labor costs. So there's a direct correlation in all these 50 sources between the labor cost and the amount of jobs that can be created, which is logical, but it kind of gives this local characteristics. And also the number of companies, like I mentioned before. If there's no companies in the location, the probability of having jobs created in the region is lower than otherwise. And also the regional contracting. Are the contracts giving to national companies? Is it even an international project? Which is also kind of lowering the probability of creating jobs. And behind all these nodes, there is a huge statistical assessment and a database, which is kind of merging this information. Yeah, and the output is the number of jobs. And then we added the societal aspects, saying, okay, when we have jobs created, we have a reduced number of unemployment spending as well, which is not relating to the municipality, but it's relating to the nation, to the government. Another example here, the tax returns. So how did we assess the tax returns? This module is based on the German taxation system because it's the best documented, I think. And here it's kind of, it depends a lot on if the building is on a rural area, how prosperous the municipality is, how good the companies in average work in the region, how big the profit rates are. And therefore we kind of derive the percentages, the shares for tax returns. To close my presentation and to show you a little bit the outputs, I want to introduce a case study building. It's not a real building, it's kind of a merged building that we created out of all our input data that we get from Belenie and from other municipalities. So we created a case study building, which is helping us to validate our modules. So here we are in Belenie. We have a school built in 1970. This is an urban location. I won't go too much in the details. I have just the numbers that you can relate and you can read. We have a 5-story building, window to wall ratio 0.2 for the technicians and engineers between you. And then we have the external walls insulation. I think the building is not a bad one. It's definitely not a bad performing building. We have U value of 0.9 for the external walls. We have 0.7 for the roof, base plate 0.3, and windows 1.3. Then we have also information collected about the heating system, cooling system, leakage areas, lower outdoor temperature, average outdoor temperature. All these information was collected to calculate. So for this example, we applied a certain amount of energy efficiency measures. In the final tool, you can decide by yourself what kind of energy efficiency measures you want to apply and what levels you have, what U values you want to reach. So we will provide a set of renovation measures, but in an expert mode, you can also create your own renovation measures. So add insulation to the roof was one of the things, add insulation to exterior walls, exchange windows, external shading devices, and add air conditioning system, upgrade heating system, upgrade water heating system. The funny thing is that since the building was already in a quite good constitution before we put this renovation measures, we have a huge improvement in the primary energy factor, but a lower improvement in the energy consumption, which you will see later. So what are the results when we applied these measures on the status quo, and what are the expected outcomes? So we had an estimated total investment cost from 236,000 euros. And the model created or calculated that there will be around 6 jobs created in the region because of the situation in Vilenia and the number of companies that are present there. Out of these jobs, of course, there's only 2 which are directly created, and then there's induced jobs and indirect job, which means jobs that are created because there is a higher income, there's people that are spending more money. And I personally, this is the way how it's done usually. I personally prefer the direct jobs. I think it's a very, very precise or a very understandable number. The other ones are a little bit abstract, but it's the way how it's usually presented. Then the tax returns, you see that the amount of investment is not very high. So the tax returns, and it was a very conservative approach. So the tax returns to the municipality are roughly 10,000 euros. But I mean, it's something, and to know this, and especially for bigger projects, this can be a very interesting number, especially when we are in a prosperous or in a situation where the companies have higher profit rates. Same goes for the particulate matter emissions. You see here the CO2 emissions are decreasing rapidly and significantly because we have a very big difference between the primary energy consumption reduction and the normal energy consumption reduction, which is indicating the particulate matter emissions. Same goes for the CO2 costs. Since we have a huge reduction of primary energy because we changed the heating system, we can see here that the CO2 cost was reduced tremendously, especially the CO2 tax cost. I added the tax for Vilenia here, and the emission trading system cost. It's the status from 1 month ago, I think. And then for the social cost, this is also a statistical work. We assess around 40 or 30 sources of social cost, and I think we chose a quite conservative approach here. I think there were numbers recently in the media talking about 3,000 euros per ton. We calculated roughly between 150 and 400 euros, or between even 80, depending on where in Europe we are. Energy cost and savings, here the same, or here it's obvious that the energy consumption reduction was lower than the primary energy consumption reduction, because here the energy cost is not really a big effect. And you will see this also in the payback period. We don't save so much energy. I think it's 10% we saved with this renovation. So this is also reflected here in the cost savings. Then the fuel poverty. This is applied only for residential buildings or social housing. You see, this was a school, so I kind of transferred it to a social or residential building. And the risk of fuel poverty for this particular location in Slovenia was shrinking from 6.9% to 5.8% because the cost for energy consumption were reduced. Just the wrap up of all these results. And then here you see the payback periods. And as I said, since the consumption reduction was so small, we see a very long payback period when we don't include any benefits, any social benefits. It will never pay back. But if we include the wider benefits, which means job creation, or the energy cost savings, CO2 cost savings, then we have a payback period from around 14 years. And if we even include societal benefits like unemployment, money savings, and the broader scope of social CO2 costs, for example, then we have a payback period from around 8 years. This is the average. And I think this is it's not a real building. We will create a list of real buildings upcoming, and also you are invited to test the tool later on, in the later stage. And then we will create, of course, more realistic scenarios. But I think this is a very good showcase of what the outputs of the tool provide. That's from my side. And I would give the word to my colleague, Nico Natek, who will actually talk about the completely opposite side, the supply side and energy efficiency, energy generation side. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward for your questions later on.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I believe you see the presentation. Yeah, please confirm. Thank you. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar also on my behalf. Hope you are feeling energized and my words find you in excellent health. My name is Niko Natek from the Energy Agency of Savinska, Šaleška and Koroška region, or XENA for short. And today I will provide only a few insights on the supply side assessment module, which we have been working on diligently within the EERAdata project. I'm very much grateful for your interest and taking the time to participate. So without further ado, I only have 15 minutes to discuss what is otherwise a rather complex topic. So here we go. So the supply side assessment module, it basically provides sort of a counterweight to other modules which deal with the identification and quantification of energy renovation measures focused on improving energy efficiency on-site the building. However, in the majority of cases, energy will be prepared remotely and delivered either as a vector or fuel to the building itself. So what we try to accomplish with the module is to understand all the major processes the energy has to undergo to reach the building and what that actually implies in terms of primary energy use and emissions. The concept is also known as the site to source energy ratio, whereby the source energy can be understood as primary energy. So before the carrier has undergone any conversions, and site energy would then be the final energy available to supply the consumer's devices. Within EU context, the concept is known as primary energy factors, which were introduced, for example, with the Energy Services Directive in 2006. But very generally speaking, a primary energy factor of 2.5 implies a 40% generation efficiency and 60% are losses. So if we would wish to make an anecdote to thermodynamics for those engineers out there, very roughly speaking, 40% would be exergy before not taking into account the efficiency of the devices using the energy, and 60% would be entropy, or the energy that we basically throw away. And that is a very rough concept of what we want to do. So inside the building, we have a bubble that actually deals with the energy renovation measures itself. And outside that bubble, we have inbound streams of energy supplied from God knows where. For this example is basically a very rough amateur sketch on how energy travels from coal through the grid to the consumers. And now lately we have some capacity from renewables and so on. And this is the gist of it. So, but the main issue that we have identified is that most commonly the utilized approaches do not portray the actual state of supply side impacts, because a primary energy factor in itself will not basically provide any valuable insight on how energy sources are used and what their actual impacts are. So each energy carrier otherwise also have their own primary energy factors attributed. However, usually this is also determined as a range of possible values that tells very little on how specific systems function. So there has been ongoing debate on whether to determine the general primary factor at 2.0 or 2.3, respective of the improved efficiency of the systems and, of course, wider uptake of renewables. However, as we argue that we should strive to address the impacts on a case-by-case basis. So this slide very tellingly illustrates how very much different we are in terms of energy generation. So below you will see the mix of electricity generation in all the three front-runner countries, or where the front-runner municipalities are based. As you can see, Denmark has done an unbelievable job in terms of transferring to sustainable energy. They produce over half of their electricity needs from wind. They have also substantial solar capacity, and the red marks conventional thermal sources such as coal and natural gas, for example. And then you have Slovenia and Spain. For example, Slovenia has basically a very uniformly divided share. It's 1/3 from nuclear power, 1/3 from conventional thermal, and 1/3 from large hydro power. And also we introduced some solar capacity as well. And for wind, we only have 2 wind turbines, not 2 megawatts, but 2 wind turbines. For Spain, you can see it's also a different picture again. They are more diverse. They also feature wind, solar, some nuclear power, and how to basically address all of these differences with a single factor. It's just not possible. I mean, basically, it tells us very little on how much accurate we can be. So we basically decided to, from the perspective of energy demand, which is one of the few inputs that the module actually requires, we take a step-by-step approach, and either if the energy is supplied from the grid or on-site, we look at each individual process individually and attribute its effects on the wider supply impact, whereby the main output factors are, of course, primary energy and greenhouse gas emissions. So electricity is basically the most easy to determine because the metrics and data are out there. We have very good data on electricity, and basically it's very well understood for each country, at least, how it's produced and how it's used in the end. We have not delved into the additional layer of complexity that would be implied with international exchange of electricity, because that is also very complex. But electricity is pretty much straightforward. So either it comes from the grid or it's supplied from on-site sources, which is a very narrow range of available technologies. Usually it's PV, and some marginal cases also include cogeneration, and very few examples also have wind power, but just not in Slovenia. And for heat, it's basically the same. It's the same story. So it's either supplied from the district heating network, or it's prepared on site by using a fuel that is also delivered from somewhere. But in the end, regardless of the method of delivery, in the end, it's all a fuel. So somewhere a fuel was converted to energy and supplied to the building. And this is a very generic approach of how we dealt with the issue. So as I mentioned, our very few inputs are energy demand indicators. So we calculated this similarly as we would in an energy renovation project. Like if you would have an EPC contract, for example, you would want to understand for the past 3 years, or preferably more if you have the data, on how the building actually performed. This would, normalize against any extreme weather events or other uncommons such as COVID, for example. And then you would get a rough estimate of how much energy you require on an annual basis. Separately, of course, for electrical energy, for heat, if the building is cooled, for example, like absorption heating, cooling, then also that energy. And of course, if domestic hot water is supplied from a different source, then that energy is also taken into account individually. And that is basically the starting point at which you start to look at energy supply. So the demand is basically then compared to all the upstream and downstream losses if you go from the building. So for the a specific case of electricity, you would attribute factors such as energy losses, conversion efficiencies, and which would translate to the actual use of energy resources and greenhouse gas emissions. Our ambition long term is to also include materials. So even if you're investing into renewable energy, you have to be aware that there's always some material cost and embedded energy regardless of what type of source you use. And I think this would also be very much interesting to be able to compare what the effects on the environmental level are beyond the emissions itself. And as I mentioned, the main outputs that we are dealing with currently is the actual use of primary energy, the use of energy carriers, either in tons or cubic meters, and greenhouse gas emissions, which is the main indicator guiding EU policy at present. And for heat, it's basically exactly the same approach. So either you're supplying it on site or you're providing it from the grid. You just apply the same factors in terms of conversion efficiencies and energy losses to basically get the same outputs. So which are the primary energy and use of materials and greenhouse gas emissions. So as I said, for electricity, the data is there and it's very good. So for energy that's lost in the transmission and distribution, we have a really nice report from the Council of European Energy Regulators. It's also fairly new. So you can see that the Slovenian power grid is actually most efficient in terms of minimized losses, which is also very much related to the fact that our penetration of renewables remains low. So it's a sad fact that renewables can cause increased inefficiencies of distribution and transmission. But anyway, as you can see that depending on where you're located, so if you're in Slovenia or Spain, a certain factor will be applied to the energy losses for electricity that is supplied from the grid. This is the presentation of factors that we use for conversion efficiencies for the major sources from formal, which are coal-based, natural gas-based, and oil-based. As you can see, the efficiencies move in the range from 34 to almost 50% for natural gas, which is the most efficient. And there are also some differences depending on where you're located in Europe. So we don't have the values for each country, and we applied the either the EU average or for the countries that don't have the data, but the data is available for Germany, Slovenia, and the Scandinavian countries. And of course, this is a bit more not straightforward issue is how to deal with the primary energy impact of non-combustible renewable energy sources. Even though they are very low compared to the energy they produce, each renewable source also has some embedded energy, which is depending on the source. It varies a lot. I mean, we actually got a hold of some studies that seem to suggest that installing, for example, PV in some less favorable conditions could actually make them an energy sink. But we argued that this is not the majority of cases. We took the approach of the energy return on energy invested. So basically looking at the entire energy that is produced in the lifetime of the operational lifetime of the technology compared to how much energy was actually used in the production and the recycling, transportation, whatnot. And this is basically what we came across. We estimate that, for example, the primary energy factor for PV is somewhere in the range from 1.05 to 1.10 in the majority of cases. And below you also have some primary energy factors for other sources based on the GEMIS model developed by the ECO Institute from Germany. And for GHG emissions, we basically applied the emission factors that are also well developed. This is the version from 2017 from the Joint Research Center that basically follows two methodologies. So it's the standard approach and also the life cycle assessment, which we also attributed individually. And this is, for example, the calorific values or heating values for fuels that we use to convert the primary energy to the actual use of materials at the end. Yeah, as you can see, for uranium, which is not basically, I mean, the production of nuclear pellets is not green by any measure of imagination, but because of its energy density, it's negligible, as you can see. And this is basically the heating values that we use to convert finally to the materials used for the supply of energy. And very briefly, going through the calculation method, as we said, we started with the energy demand benchmark, and we applied certain factors. So, for example, electricity supply from the grid was then applied with the factor of energy losses, and those combined energy demand with energy losses included the factors of from the Eurostat, depending on where you are, which source was used to produce the energy. So specifically for Denmark, Germany, Slovenia, and for the European average. And moving on, that value was then attributed with the conversion efficiencies to understand how much of that energy was actually required. So how much primary energy was actually required to meet the demand of the building, and then the outputs were basically the primary energy used to cover the demand of the building. This is basically also the next step. So applying common emission factors to the energy requirements. So the Covenant of Mayors or IPCC emission factors, which then bring the output of greenhouse gas emissions to meet the demand. And of course, we decided to just make a comparison against the generic values. So for the primary energy factors used within the European Union, as well as for the emission factors for the grid, we just applied these as a comparison to see how much the generic approach differs from our step-by-step, more detailed approach. And of course, the same approach, a bit more complex, was applied for dealing with electrical energy produced on site. So whether you produce it from combustible renewable sources, combustible fossil fuels, or non-combustible renewable energy, they are applied with different factors according to the actual impact of the technologies used. And renovation measures currently are basically generically attributed, so covering only a range of possible improvements to the building itself. We have already prepared sort of optimization tool ready approach that would allow users to quantify their potential to produce renewable energy on site. For example, photovoltaics or wind energy. Just by knowing a few factors such as building orientation, building length, width, and roof size area. But this will be included in the DST at the later stage. And this was only a very small part of how we decided to calculate the impacts on energy supply. Unfortunately, we could not go into more detail within the 15 minutes we had, and I see I'm already 5 minutes past, so I apologize for this. And I think I would conclude with this, and thank you for your attention.